Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I'm Kent Lassman, the president here at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. We'll be joined for a conversation tonight with my friend Philip Howard about his new book, just released yesterday, Not Accountable. I want to thank Solid State Books, who's here to sell. We're going to have Q&A from the audience that's live here in the room, as well as questions from the online audience. If you want to submit a question online, there should be a tab at the bottom of your screen that says insert a question, or you can send an email to events@cei.org. Those are all going to be filtered to me right here, and we'll get them to Philip, and we'll get you in the conversation. As I said, our book this evening, the first book forum of the year for CEI, is Not Accountable: Rethinking the Constitutionality of Public Employee Unions. Author Philip K. Howard, thank you for being with us. Why don't we start with the easiest question of the night and tell me what motivated you to write this book now?
Well, I've written a bunch of other books about government, and there seemed to be a kind of a limiting factor in doing any government reform, which is that you can't really manage government. You can't hold anybody accountable and such. So I started looking into public unions and realized that unions were analyzed, I think, in the wrong way. It's not just that they're inefficient, is that they've undermined constitutional governance. We elect mayors and governors and a president who don't actually have the authority to fix what they say they're going to fix.
So I found, like your other work, going back decades now, this was not a particularly partisan book, right? This is about how our representative democracy operates, or in many cases just doesn't work. The job doesn't get done. Was that in your mind as you sat down to write a partisan, kind of the ugly law politics of things?
Well, it's not a partisan book in a sense, but it is because everyone knows that the public employee unions are probably the leading constituency of the Democratic Party. They provide money, thousands of campaign workers, and I go through some of the stories in the book of just how powerful they are. 10% of the delegates at the Democratic National Convention are members of the teachers union. So it's partisan in the sense that the unions are affiliated principally with the Democratic Party, but it's not intended to be partisan. It's intended to be a book about good government and what's needed to have good government. And indeed, I would argue it's pro-labor in a variety of ways. I mean, who wants to work in a school or a agency where performance doesn't matter? And Paul Volcker wrote about this in his reports on civil service reform, that you have to create a system where people feel pride and know that everybody else is doing their share. Well, that's just not the reality in many or most of America's agencies and schools.
So just to pick up on that, you reference in your book, I think it's Peter Drucker that you call on, that culture every time is going to eat the lunch of rules.
Right.
So what you're talking about here is accountability from the people around you, a sense of pride about what you're doing. It's not just the black and white words on the paper that say what you have to do.
It's a really important point here. The public unions defend the current system, say it's just a matter of due process. Well, just a matter of due process means nobody is accountable. I mean, literally, we're talking about 0.01% of people. You can't. 99% of federal employees get a fully successful rating. 2 or 3 teachers out of 300,000 each year get terminated for performance in the state of California. There's no accountability. But the importance of accountability is not getting rid of legions of bad public employees. I think most public employees probably want to do the right thing and such. The importance of accountability is it's like the stem cell of a good culture. If the knowledge that everyone will be accountable if they don't do their job inspires everyone else to do their share and to feel pride. And if you don't have accountability, you can't have, or you can have, there are in fact government agencies whose cultures transcend this. And, we could name some of them, but it takes a lot of work and a strong culture to transcend the fact that nobody's accountable.
So we might have glossed over just a little too quickly. I want to hit home a point before we get into the core argument of the book. You're writing narrowly about public employee unions. It's not all unionism.
Right.
So what makes a union in a government setting different than a union anywhere else in our economy?
It's a really good question. The difference between trade unions like auto workers or steel workers and public employee unions is not a difference in degree, it's a difference in kind. There's a fundamental difference in the negotiating dynamic. In a trade union context, the union has a vested interest in the viability of the enterprise. If they demand inefficient work rules, either the company will go out of business or it'll move out of town. If there's a narrow scope of the negotiation, and it's all about dividing the pie between capital and labor, but it's narrow. In the public union, because government can't move out of town, it's whatever you can get away with, and the taxpayers will pay it. And the other difference is under the National Labor Relations Act, it would be unlawful for management to somehow pay off compliant union members and be collusive. Public bargaining is not bargaining, it is collusion. It's the essence of public sector bargaining is that public unions spend millions of dollars and devote thousands of workers to get an elected official in office and then sit down at the same side of the bargaining table and say, what are you going to give me? It's not bargaining, it's a payoff. So it's this profoundly corrupt system in which the loser is the public good.
It sounds, as you're describing it, it sounds a little bit like these movies I've seen that don't always have nice stereotypes of people from the Mediterranean area. And these union guys come in, they sit down and say, it's a nice office you have here, Senator. It'd be a shame if you lost it.
Well,
is that the level of corruption that we're talking about?
Well, no, probably not.
No Mario Puzo.
No, there are probably no horses' heads put in people's beds and that sort of thing. But the brutality of the tactics. I mean, if someone stands up and says, I'm going to oppose this, and the unions think it's important, they will mobilize national union resources to get that person unelected. And I tell lots of stories of that. The one really big battle that happened in our lifetime, when there was Reagan firing the air traffic controller, was when Scott Walker took on the unions in Wisconsin. 100,000 people went to the Capitol. They invaded the Capitol building. We forget that, in Wisconsin. All the Democratic legislators left the state so they wouldn't have a quorum. They eventually got the vote and then and won. And then the unions spent tens of millions of dollars on a recall election, immediately started it again and had the battle all over again. Walker won again, at which point the unions got a Democratic district attorney to indict Walker for abuses of campaign laws during the recall election, which had to get thrown out as completely baseless by the Wisconsin Supreme Court. So you're talking about 4 years of warfare that with national union resources spent to beat him. That's what politicians know that they're facing if they raise their hand and say, gosh, this is really not good for the public to spend twice as much as we should, on public services or the like.
And just with that anecdote to see that through, you illustrate with the book, people forget Governor Walker was vindicated in each count.
At each count,
right?
absolutely.
So the state surpluses went up after changing the entitlements for the unions. The campaign charges were baseless. On every count, he came out ahead.
And the state came out ahead. So it's they're saving an estimated $5 to $7 billion a year. Democratic governors who come in have made no move.
Can we pause? $7 billion in a state the size of Wisconsin.
Yeah, right.
This is not
Yeah, no,
coins
this
in
is
the
real
couch
money.
cushions.
This is real money. So what unions do, the public unions do in the states where they have clout, which is about half the states, is they make government unmanageable. No one's ever put a number on manageability, but it's like disconnecting the spokes from the hub. Every time you want to make a decision, you have to get the approval of the union rep. So you're sitting there, the smallest things. I mean, in New York City, you can't, if you're a supervisor, you can't go and ask an employee, how could we do this better? So that would be violating the exclusive dealing rule in the union contract. You can only have that discussion with the union rep. I mean, it's just unbelievable the things you cannot do.
There's a second part of this argument that really, I think, is a core stanchion for you. There's this corruption of sitting on both sides of the table that you've just discussed. But there's also this essential, what is the nature of government question, right? So it goes by the terms of delegation and you're right. If legislative power cannot be delegated, it surely cannot be bargained or contracted away. And so I'd like you to explain for everyone, what is the legislative function that is essential that is being given away to the public unions through collective bargaining?
Well, it's both legislative and executive. And so the biggest sin here occurred when the public unions got legislatures to authorize collective bargaining to require elected executives to negotiate with the unions for what they wanted. And so I argue that under basic constitutional principles, which we should talk about for a minute, since that's the argument of the book, the legislature isn't authorized to take away executive power, to manage government. That's the essence of an executive job, a mayor or governor or president. And there's, in the federal context, there's an enormous amount of law about Congress's inability to remove core executive powers, including starting with the right to terminate officials that the president doesn't think is doing a good job. That's a violation. The Civil Service Reform Act of 1978, which compels collective bargaining and also has these detailed procedures for any kind of discipline of an employee that make it essentially impossible to hold someone accountable, I argue, are clearly unconstitutional.
So, and these are not relics of the founding. This didn't come to us through Blackstone and common law. This is less than a lifetime ago.
Oh, this all happened. So back in the old days, when unions first started, the origin story was that factory owners were killing workers. They were using child labor. I mean, so they were mangling people in the mines and in the railroads and such. Unions started for a reason, which was that these companies were in fact abusive and they were needed. The origin story for public unions, there were no such scandals. We already had civil service systems that basically protected government workers and such, is that in the height of the rights revolution, the union leaders realized that they could just call this a matter of rights, use their political influence, starting with JFK mainly, to get collective bargaining powers, and people didn't really know what they were doing. And I have a chapter on what the labor law experts thought they were doing and what would clearly be unconstitutional in their view. These were the proponents of public bargaining, and exactly what they said would be unconstitutional is what has happened.
Including proponents who were former labor officials and labor negotiators.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So the book walks through nicely 5 effects that you identify, negative effects of this problem. And I'd like to list them and have you speak to each of them as I remind our online audience that to get involved in the conversation here with Philip Howard, you just need to send an email to events@cei.org. and they will automatically appear here on my lap for Philip and I to talk about. In addition, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. But again, we have 5 effects, and I will tell you in advance, I find 4 of them very persuasive. And one of them, I had to read the chapter twice, and I'm almost there with you, but not quite. 1, public sector unions sever the links of accountability. It renders government unmanageable. You just talked about. It makes government unaffordable. It harms the public good. And then it entrenches these abuses and uses public power to block reform. It's its own self-sustaining system. Could you speak to that? The accountability, the management?
Sure. So briefly, democracy is basically just a process of accountability. We elect officials. If they do a lousy job, we elect someone else or someone from a different party. That's the framework of the Constitution. But for that to have meaning, the people we elect have to have authority over the people working for government. Madison talked about this. There must be an unbroken chain of dependence from the lowest level to the highest level, as Madison put it. So there's zero accountability, so democracy can't work. We elect people who are figureheads. The second one, not manageability, we've talked about that, but it's profoundly, and I think immorally costly, that trash collection in big cities costs twice what private carters use. That running the MTA probably costs 3 times what a private contractor would do. That the work rules prevent principals in schools from evaluating teachers or giving them extra training because it limits all those things, and how much impact, how much interaction a principal can have with a teacher. It's madness. I mean, we've inverted the authority pyramid. So the government's working for the workers rather than for the people who it's supposedly answering to. Not affordable is not mainly in salaries. I would actually argue that many categories of public employees should be paid more. That I think teachers are probably, certainly in some jurisdictions, underpaid.
And so you're talking about salary.
That's salary,
but not total compensation.
Not total comp. Okay. So the abuses in the pension system, which have rendered a number of states functionally bankrupt, are early retirement, plus things like spiking of overtime in the last year to increase to increase the pensions. So you'll have people who earn less than $100,000 a year getting pensions of more than that and retiring at age 50 and then coming back to work for the government again while they're collecting all this money. So you have literally 6-figure 100,000 people in Illinois or something like that, or making more than $100,000 a year in pensions. So the pension abuses have really, they've been inexcusable. There's studies of them and such, but that was all because of union power.
So let's just press on this for a point, because I think it's important to illustrate it for, particularly for our audience. There's not a few bean counters out there. When you write about some 20,000 public employee retirees in Illinois and 40,000 public employee retirees in California, right, who are all earning more than $100,000 from those pension benefits, that's $2 and $4 billion a year. And many of those people have gone back to work. Yes, that's right. Okay. Right. So they're double dipping. And so it's a combination of, but again, the way the bargaining dynamic worked is you go to the officials that you've gotten elected. You ask, what can they give you? And they say, well, we can't give you too high a salary because there'll be a public outrage. It'll look bad. So it'll look bad. So they promise all these benefits like early retirement or inflating of pensions that are not transparent and that people can't see, and that kick in after the elected leader making the promises is long out of office. So he's not accountable either. So it's really an abusive, it's an abusive governance, and
it ought to be transparent and straightened out, and people who ought to get paid more, which I think, again, some should be, ought to get paid more, but they ought to be manageable. We ought to, if we're going to pay teachers more, we ought to make sure they're good teachers.
So you have some, I'll put you on the spot. You have some statistics, some interesting work that was done by Terry Moe about teachers in particular, right? So Moe argues extensive studies, empirical work, where he suggests if you got rid of the bottom 5% of teachers nationwide, that the benefit would be extraordinary growth in the rankings for how well students do with math and science. Why is that not an outrage?
Well,
I don't know a parent that wants their student, their child, their neighbor child to have a bad teacher.
why is it not an outrage that the teachers unions refused to let the teachers go back to work for 2 years during COVID and refused to do remote learning because it wasn't in their contract? So it had to be separately negotiated, and they, like in Broward County, I think it was 3 hours a day. That's all they had to do. Why is that not an outrage? We're supposedly teaching the children of this country, and the studies show that as a result of their recalcitrance, the third graders' level of learning was 17 percentile points lower than the third graders of the same cohort just 2 years before. You know, and the experts say that can never be recovered. So why is this not an outrage? We've destroyed people's futures, basically, because unlike nurses, grocery clerks, and all other essential workers, the teachers refuse to go back to work.
Well, that this is maybe a foundational question, a preliminary question I should have asked. You used the term early in our conversation. You said, unlike the trade unions, right? Government employees tend to be well-educated. They tend to be certified. They tend to have options for their employment. They have skills that can transfer. Are they trade people or are they professionals? And if they're professionals, do they need protections?
Right.
What is that about?
Well, this is a broader discussion. The trade union penetration in the U.S. workforce, the private workforce, is now 6%. In the 50s, it was 35 or 40%. It's gone way down because the workforce has become professionalized and become service-oriented, which is not as appropriate for unionization. You know, you needed unions when you had a factory and everybody had a rote job, and they were trying to protect people against the perils of Taylorism, basically.
So the notion, am I correct?
Right.
Or am I just out in right field? The notion being workers would be replaceable. So they needed somebody to help with their voice. They were interchangeable costs.
And again, this came from a background of corporate abuses. But when you have
are government workers like that? They seem to acknowledge workers to me.
Abuses, there was a study for Kennedy by famous guy, his name slipped my mind right now, who academic who said the problem with government workers is that basically they were fat and happy. You know, this is the late 50s. They were not a sort of a wholesale raft of abuses. I mean, you can find abuses from time to time of somebody abusing their power, a principal or someone else, and they ought to get fired or worse. But by and large, that was not why we created unions. And so, no, there weren't abuses.
Okay. I'm going to turn to the audience for questions here. We're not quite halfway through. And as you prepare your questions, I'm going to ask if you're with a media organization to announce your name and the organization. Otherwise, simply state your question. That's all we need to hear so we can keep the conversation going, get as many people involved as possible. Right here in front, Sean, why don't you go ahead?
Sean Higgins, I'm with the Research Fellow here at CEI. To what extent are these government unions a little de-democratic, and is reforming them in that direction the way to go? I mean, the persistent problem with unions is that they often exist before the worker has had a chance to sort of weigh on whether they want them to exist at the workplace, and often exist long past when the workers there. And there's a sort of management class that takes over the unions and is giving the individual workers the solution to sort of this problem?
Right. Well, there is it's the dynamic of the workforce is the question. Is the dynamic of the workforce such that people don't really have a choice? Is it self-sustaining? The answer to that is yes. Once you're approved as a union in most jurisdictions, not now in Wisconsin, your union certification lasts forever. And heaven help you if you try to change that.
It's like a government job.
Yeah. It lasts forever. So one of the reasons why people accept unions as a state of nature is because there's actually no procedural mechanism that's practical for getting rid of a union. It's much harder to, I've seen the procedures. You have to get like petitions from half the union members, not a quorum, but in order to have it come up for a vote again. I mean, it's just an unbelievably onerous thing to get rid of a union. So they've made it impossible for internal governance to replace them. Scott Walker had a law passed that said the unions had to be certified every year by their members. Well, guess what? Most people have dropped out of those unions.
One of my hobbies is reading. And so if you'll indulge me, I'm going to bring our audience along. You draw out and illustrate an analogy to a great piece of satire, our hero Gulliver,
Right.
and the Lilliputians. And you suggest the image of being tied down by rule after rule after rule. And what I don't know if everyone is aware of is that our hero, eventually the Lilliputians let him up. They let him move around, but they decide in secret with different committees, there's all this intrigue at the palace, that they're going to have to punish him. And in fact, what they decide to do is they're going to blind him, and then they are going to starve him. Among his crimes, he had been kind to their enemies.
Right.
My favorite crime, there's a long list of them. He had, when their palace was burning down, he had peed on the fire and put the fire out. And you're not allowed to do that in the palace, apparently. My question for you is about the Lilliputians that we deal with. And here I mean directly public officials. Are they blind to what's happening? Are they complicit? Do they not understand the problem, or do they just not see a way out? And what we have here is a recipe for the way out, which is a strategy.
This is a much longer discussion. Washington, in my view, is a mighty engine of the status quo. Leaders of neither party really want to rock the boat. Neither party has a positive vision of how to govern better. The Republicans simply run against the Democrats. The Democrats say we need more resources and attention to climate change and income inequality, but they say nothing about how to make government work better. And they will say nothing about it because it offends one of their main interest groups, the public unions. So, I think that, this city that we're sitting in is a city of lemmings, and people rush back and forth and argue about today's classified document that's found in Indiana or something that doesn't really matter much. And they don't really talk about how to govern better by and large. And so I think change always comes from the outside. In the 60s was the last time we had big change. It came from revelations by Rachel Carson about, despoiling the environment, by Ralph Nader about unsafe cars, by the civil rights movement marching in the streets, by anti-war protesters. And we had this last time of change. In the 30s, time before that, we had a Great Depression. We had to change. Time before that was the progressive era. And that reflected a kind of pressure building for decades of people upset about corrupt government, about abusive corporate employers and such. Before that was the Civil War. And the pressure had been building for decades by the abolitionists and others about it. So change, all those changes came from outside forces. And change here will come from an outside force. And my hope with this book is it will make the public realize that this is not something inefficient. It's not just the way government works. This is a scandal. It's a scandal that we don't have better schools for inner city kids. It's a scandal that we tolerate work rules that waste half to 2/3 of the money in what everybody knows are ridiculous work rules and feather bedding. It's a scandal. That money could be used in all kinds of ways to, take care of the homeless or deal with income inequality or any liberal goal you want. And apropos of the Lilliputians, and you and I have talked about this in other forums, this is not the only problem with the structure of modern government. We have 1,000-page rule books, that prevent people from doing the job. We have procedures that prevent us from getting permits for high-speed transmission lines, when we need them to take energy from renewable sources to the cities. There are all these problems with the city, but it all kind of starts with giving people responsibility and holding them accountable. And if people don't have the authority to make those decisions, the teacher doesn't have authority to maintain order, or whatever it is, then they have to be accountable. They can't be given authority without accountability. So we need to, this is sort of the cornerstone I think we need to pull out of this horrible machine we have going.
I think I saw a question right in the middle here, David.
Yeah, David Osgo, not with a media company. There's been a lot of work recently about the administrative state and how it's gotten away from control of Congress. Do you think that it's the administrative state that's driving the power of the public sector unions, or are the public sector unions driving the power of the administrative state?
The question is whether administrative state is enabling this, or whether these people are enabling the administrative state. I would say that they're actually somewhat independent, because what we're talking about, when people refer to the administrative state, they're talking about regulations that are imposed by unelected officials that change public policy and require people to do something to catch pollution in a different way, or whatever it happens to be. This is a book about the operating machinery of government. It's really how a cop does his job, how a teacher does her job, how you give permits. It's kind of it's not policy. Administrative state dispute is mainly about policy, and there's a lot of, we could talk about that too, but this is really about operations. How do you make whatever government does, how do you make it do it in a kind of reasonably effective way that is accountable? And so I think they're different things.
Is it too much to ask of our Congress to hold accountable public sector unions accountable to the Constitution when they have such trouble holding their own members accountable?
I mean, another longer discussion. Congress is hopeless, right? I mean, it's hopeless. So Congress, the best Congress can do to change anything is to endorse some other group's, sensible ideas, and they can vote it up or down. I view the main job of Congress as a kind of a ratification body rather than a law conceiving, law-making body. I do think that Congress, just to rein in the regulatory state, should have more tools of accountability for what policies agencies are implementing. And the Chadha case in the 1980s basically said that you couldn't have a legislative veto on regulatory rules, that it would require presentment to the president. And I think I would support a constitutional amendment eliminating that because the agencies are basically acting as mini legislatures. So the legislature, it seems to me, ought to have a potential veto on that.
We'll remind everyone with the renewed interest in the major questions doctrine, proposals like the REINS Act would do just that,
Right.
right? And stay well within the bounds of CHATA and subsequent cases. Right in the center, please.
I'm Mike Ashford. I'm with the Institute of Main Studies at George Mason University. I've seen public opinion polls suggesting that unions now have a more positive rating among the public, especially among the accountants. A, do you think that's true? B, why is it true? And C, what can be done about it?
So just before you start, I've been reminded, my job is to help repeat questions from the room so everyone online can hear them. Nigel's asking you to discuss public opinion polling on popularity of unions.
Right. So those polls don't distinguish between trade unions and public unions. And I think young people are indeed probably have some favorable view of unions because they don't know anything about unions, and they have an unfavorable view of the status quo. So I don't think they're important. I don't think people have any awareness of what I've written in this book about what public unions have done to, I mean, who's in favor of burning taxpayer dollars, right? I mean, nobody I know, no liberal I know. So, I mean, that's what we're talking about. Who's in favor of keeping a lousy teacher that everyone knows isn't doing the job? The unions talk about the teachers' rights. The teachers' rights, what about the rights of the students? I mean, that's the purpose of the school. It's for the students. It's not for the teachers. This is like, it's completely upside down. So, you know, my view is that if people aren't convinced that this is bad, then we have a problem with our culture. But I don't think anybody who is in favor of, quote, generally unions has thought through the issue in the context of the delivery of government services.
So if I could pick up on Nigel's question, I'm going to ask you to guess, so hypothesize. Do you think there's a relationship between the improved polling on the how much people like unions with the decrease in the number of people actually participating? Which is to say, the more direct experience you have with a union, maybe your approval ratings aren't as high.
You know, I don't know.
Is that relationship there or not?
No, everyone knows the way you ask a question can lead to a set of answers. You can ask exactly the same question in a different way and get a different set of answers. So I don't take the polling seriously.
I see another question up here in front, but real quick, I want to ask you. I think you alluded to it. You talked about, that's why I wrote this for the public. We're talking about getting people excited and motivated. Who is your audience, right? Is it lawmakers? Is it a series of people that work in Article 3 courts, the appellate system? Who are you writing to with this book?
Well, that's a good question. I think I'm writing to the American public, but I'm hoping that Article 3 judges will read it. And I know that some already have, because I've had discussions with them. I hope that experts will read it and people who care about good government. I had a long talk with the head of a Democratic think tank the other day who said, I can't say anything because that would be self-immolation, as he put it. But of course, you're right. So the question is, how do we advance this so that we can move to a better place? Ultimately, I have a piece coming out next week in the Daily Beast on the liberal case against public unions, where I talk about why no liberal worth his salt can possibly justify the status quo. They just can't do it. It makes government work badly for the people. They just can't do it.
Something else you draw out for us is it not only makes government work bad for their constituents, which creates problems for these politicians, right? People get upset when the school's broken, when the kids don't learn, when the potholes aren't fixed.
And they vote for Donald Trump because they think that Donald Trump or some other totalitarian is going to fix it. I mean, all the extremism we see is the result of frustration that no, people promise change we can't believe in. What do we get?
Well, I was
Drain
going
the swamp. You know, what do
I
we
was
get?
going to say, it also prevents them from pursuing the goals that they do have,
That's
right?
right.
We're talking about these unfunded obligations with pensions that are massive, massive. We got a couple questions here in the audience. Let me see if I can get across the room right here with the maroon tie.
Thank you very much for the talk. I'm looking forward to reading the book. In terms of actionable solutions, you've talked about making public employee unions unconstitutional. Short of that, is there something else that can be done along the lines of, like, are public employee unions incorrect in concept? Or
Right.
is it the regulations that govern them? Can we get rid of exclusive representation or get rid of their ability simply to contribute to political campaigns? Something else that can.
So
Yeah,
we have a question here about, is it all or nothing, or can we have incremental steps towards?
And right, is it all? I'm not actually arguing that public unions are per se unconstitutional. What I'm arguing is that the controls that they have been given by legislation over elected executives that have removed executive power to manage government are unconstitutional. And so collective bargaining, the requirement of collective bargaining, I believe, is unconstitutional. The numerous statutory rigidities, mandated seniority or whatever, that prevent people from picking the best, that I think impinge on executive authority and should be unconstitutional. We haven't talked about the constitutional arguments, but the Article 2 in the federal context is, I think it's reasonably clear. The guarantee clause in Article 4, which is so far in the 4 cases in the Supreme Court in 200 years, has been held to be non-justiciable, addresses this very point, which is that the United States shall guarantee to every state a Republican form of government. And what Madison said that meant, in an extensive commentary by him during the constitutional debates, is you can't cede government authority to any private group, a group of nobles or a favored class, that whoever is running government has to be directly accountable to the voters. That's what a Republican form of government means. So what has happened in the last 50 years, almost without our noticing it, is that the people we elect to run government actually don't have the authority. So that's the argument. And there is a question of how far could unions go? I mean, there were unions before collective bargaining. The National Education Association was like the American Bar Association. It was and good practices for teachers. They worked with political leaders. They went and testified before legislatures. Great, to try to make schools better. And then collective bargaining turned them into a giant engine of selfishness against the public interest. I mean, literally it flipped. And so it's a really good question. It's really about not getting rid of unions, but restoring legitimate constitutional authority.
And I want to see if we can, for our audience that will be coming back to this online, I want to see if we can just put this in a really tight format. There's 3 steps to that constitutional argument, I think I heard you say. The first is about delegation. The second is about the ability to have a guarantee for a Republican form of government.
Right.
And the third is about the general welfare clause. Is that the sum of the constitutional argument, those 3 prongs, or is there more?
No, I think there's really one, leaving aside the Article 2 prong for the federal government, there's really one prong, which is the delegation of sovereign power to private entities.
Mm-hmm.
That's manifested in the guarantee clause, and is also reflected in the general goal of the Constitution to promote the general welfare, and the take care clause, and a variety of other clauses that kind of reinforce the idea that the purpose of government is to serve the public, not to serve public employees or any other private group.
So what I didn't hear, and I wonder how much you explored this, it had been part of a line of cases, including overturning a Bood. It's First Amendment, coerced speech. Mark Janus presented to America a few years ago out of an Illinois teachers union problem, that he had coerced speech with his dues. There's little First Amendment discussion in your book. Is that by design?
Yeah, it's by design. I think the Supreme Court has taken the First Amendment angle against unions as far as it can go. I didn't see a strong First Amendment point for what I'm arguing. And if you read the Janus opinion, most of the opinion is about the ineffectiveness of how government unions have made government ineffective. Had nothing to do with the First Amendment argument. It's just that the opinion goes on and on about how ungovernable government's become. But the Supreme Court's never been presented with a theory of governance. There is this other constitutional point that you make, which is I'm arguing, and I have no constitutional basis for making this argument, which I say, that it should be unconstitutional for public employee unions to mobilize the mass of public employment against the public good. They can't, they swear an oath of loyalty to the Constitution. They have a fiduciary duty to the public. And for them to negotiate against the public good, which manifestly they have done for 50 years. Again, the indictment is there, making it cost more, work worse, et cetera. I think is a violation of the goal of public service and of the Constitution. And there ought to be not a general duty of loyalty, but one that says at a minimum, public employees can't. What they've done is really kind of organize the mass of public employees. There are 22 million people who work for government in this country, against the reform of government. The most powerful interest group are the employees who now are organized to prevent government from working better. Well, what's wrong with this picture? It's not just the guarantee clause that's wrong. It's as I say at the beginning of the book, it's like traitorous. It's an act of disloyalty. They're supposed to be serving the public.
We have a question right here in front.
Kind of where you answered, I was going to ask about Janus and my optimism about the Janus decision seems to be misplaced.
Do you have any optimism? I know there's a case. Are you familiar with the case that's working its way through California right now that really is a threat to the decision in Janus? Do you think that's going to stand and be good law?
Oh, yeah, I think Janus will prevail. I think it's, I think, in general, the public unions are a good example of the emperor has no clothes. And once you realize, as in Wisconsin, that they simply waste money and it's not really good for the public, very hard to put it back.
Okay.
It's just a question of getting over the inertial forces and getting rid of it. So I doubt if they'll get rid of Janus.
Okay. I want to remind everyone online, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And if you email at events@cei.org, it ends up fed to Philip and I right here in the front of the room. So you can be part of the conversation as well. We have another question right here in front.
Yeah, John Higgins again, the research fellow here at CBI. Just to play the devil's advocate role, by necessity, would public employees have to lose out under reform, or are there alternate ways to protect them and represent their interests and their rights?
Are there alternative ways to represent public employees in their rights? I believe in civil service. I believe in a merit system. I think a merit system protects the rights of public employees and gives them an honorable place to work. We have an anti-merit system at the moment. The civil service system had all kinds of protections against unfairness that don't prevent people from being accountable and that don't prevent public managers from managing agencies. Other countries have public unions where actually there's little accountability, but they have complete management powers, and and they work pretty well. So I think there is a discussion that Paul Volcker tried to get started, and there are some other the Partnership for Public Service, place like that, about what public service should look like. But you can never have the discussion until you get rid of the stranglehold of the public unions.
So I alluded to earlier, one area that I struggled with is this notion of the general welfare clause. Part of the title of one of the chapters is about the public interest. I think you do wonderful work, Philip, with your organization, Common Good. But even the notion of common good, I ask, how do we know what is the common good, or how do we name the public interest? Because some of the argument rests on this very slippery notion.
How do we, people used to ask me, I wrote a book called The Death of Common Sense. Who's common sense? So the point of that book was not to say that there was one kind of common sense, but was to give people the freedom to try to use their common sense, and they be accountable for whether they want or not. There are 1,000 ways to skin a cat. Let people try to succeed and not. So what's the common good? We have a constitutional democracy in which people elect people who say, this is what I'm going to do. Whoever gets elected, by definition, in my view, is serving the common good. What's happened in that chapter particularly, which you haven't talked about, is that the public unions not only are unaccountable and not manageable and unaffordable, they've used their clout to change public policy for themselves. The California correction officers got together and they promoted a bill called 3 Strikes and You're Out that doubled, or something like that, the size of the prison population in California, with people going to jail for life for stealing a golf club because they had earlier stolen a banana and a Snickers bar or something. So they had 3 strikes. It was like completely unjust and unfair, but they promoted a policy that would increase their employment. So that to me is not an arguable, that's for their benefit, not for the common good's benefit. Nobody sort of ran on that. So when I talk about the common good and their conflict with the common good, I'm talking about them just advancing selfish proposal. Last year in the New York State Legislature, there were 21 bills to sweeten the pension of public employees. 21 bills. Year after year, not all of them passed. Year after year, they're pounding the table. Well, none of this has to do with anything except them. It's not about the rest of the public, and their job is to serve the public. That's the only point I was trying to make in that book. I see Stuart Taylor has a question.
Virginia had 3 strikes you're out, and then I think it's been eliminated.
Right.
It came in under George Allen's administration as governor. I don't know, maybe 20 years ago or something.
So the interesting point here that these 3 strikes laws, these pension laws, they're coming across the country in ways that appear to achieve one goal, but really benefit the union. I think that's the point where
Right. So there are all these selfish, the sort of pretext for things that help public employees.
Yes.
Do
we have a question in the back?
Stuart Taylor right there.
Yes, hi.
Right. I'm sorry, I couldn't see you, Stuart.
Not currently. Why didn't they use media? Didn't they be educating the public about this? Now, some of them are in the pocket of the parties that are in the pocket of unions. I get that. But they're not all in the pocket of the unions, or are they? Why? I mean, that's who should be doing something about it.
What's the responsibility of the media?
Wait, are you talking about the media or are you talking about politicians?
I'm talking about the media.
Okay, well, the media are also lemmings, as you know, and they're chasing the same ball. Where's your classified document? Every day. So unless it's some sort of crisis, they're all just running after the same ball. This is not an idea that anyone's raised. It's a little complicated, I guess. I don't know. But where's their argument in the media about about making government work better. No, I mean, or in the, you know, it's just nowhere, right? I mean, so why would they address this any more than anyone else? They're, you know, when I talk to the media about something like this, oh, this is, they'll say, gosh, that's really interesting, but we couldn't write about it because nobody's debating it on Capitol Hill.
Oh, investigate what's happening at school. How the teachers union.
Where are the muckrakers anymore, Philip?
Well, they're not, they're, with a few exceptions, they're not in good government. They're trying to expose individual politicians or, you know, find a classified document somewhere. And Stuart, you know this better than I do. I mean, you know, it's very hard to get the attention of someone for something that people aren't already talking about. It's just the nature of the, it's the nature of the beast. And so my hope, I was interviewed by somebody yesterday about this, and they said, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, gosh, my dream, my dream is that this will have some sort of impact, like some of those books in the 60s or Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, where people will wake up and say, wait a minute, this is crazy. We're burning money. We're destroying the lives of children. We're for no reason, for literally no reason. There's no justification for any of this. It's not how any business would work. It's not how any good government would work. It's not how governments that are effective anywhere do work. You know, it's a scandal. It's a scandal, and I think it, and the way they control government is unconstitutional. If it doesn't matter much who you elect, then the Constitution doesn't work.
We talked a little bit about before the forum. We talked a little bit about the foreword is written by former governor Mitch Daniels, who's lately been in the news. The book goes into several examples during the tenure of Mayor Bloomberg in New York City, with Rikers Island, the teachers unions, and on and on and on. Do you expect? Do you have any hopes, expectations about support for these ideas from non-traditional places? Like, for example, the rank and file of unions.
I don't know about the rank and file of unions, but I do hope that that some candidates from 2020 in the 2024 election, and I deliberately timed this book, got it from conception to publication in less than a year, which is a miracle in the publishing industry. Timed it so that it would be 2 years ahead of 2024, because I wanted to attract a few candidates who are willing to say this, because I think the public will respond to it. And the people in the lead will not say it, including Republican leaders, because they're scared of the backlash from the unions. Even if they say they're anti-union, they know what the power of the unions is. And they know that the unions will come out after them. So the candidates who will be likely to do this are people like Mitch Daniels, or Mitch Daniels, one of these, who would say, I'm willing to tell the truth. I'm willing to say what needs to happen.
Okay, I'm going to be wrapping us up here on time. I want to make sure that we get a few administrative notes in. Before I do that, what is the one idea you want to leave our audience with and make sure that people carry forward? Because the best sellers of this next bestseller are going to be the people that know about the book. They're going to spread it by word of mouth. What do you want these people to know, Philip?
Well, what I'd like people to do is to actually read the book. I mean, the book will speak for itself. It's a very short book. It's 165 pages. I'm starting to get, book came out yesterday. I've gotten 7 columns and reviews, which have been really wonderful column today by Michael Barone. I just want people to read the book and see this as a problem, not of Democrats versus, Republicans, but it's a problem of basic foundational governance. We can't have a democratic society until we have the ability to manage government again. and we can't address people's frustrations. And I want people to know that and start telling their friends that.
Well,
It
good.
it needs to be a movement.
Good news on that front. I think the latest polling out of Gallup about a month and a half ago is largest segment of the electorate now, 42% is independents. So these are the people that are going to be reading the book and swaying those elections.
Almost 2/3 of Americans support major structural reform of government, and neither party is giving them a vision.
Okay. I want to thank everyone with us, both online and here at the office at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Our next event is coming up next month. We're going to be on Capitol Hill with CEI's Free to Prosper. This is our pro-growth agenda for the 118th Congress. Philip will be staying around for a few minutes if you want to chat with him or visit our friends at Solid State Books, pick up a book. I bet you can even get an autograph. Philip Howard, thank you so much for what you've done here. Longtime fan and first-time interviewer.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you all for coming.
Very good.